Welcome to the Nintendo Power Retrospectives. I'm Count Zero. The 16-bit revolution is continuing on with Nintendo Power number 29 for October of 1991. We're covering another Super Nintendo game this issue, along with another PC port. Well, we got a lot of ground to cover, and we're having to split this episode in half again, so let's get started. Our cover game for this issue is Star Trek for the NES, and we have another diorama cover. Looks like the artist used a model kit of the Enterprise refit from the first 3 Star Trek films, with some internal lighting, which is actually a really cool touch. In the letters column, we have letters from kids whose parents are hogging the console, with one parent of note being a die-hard RPG player. You know what? If you're one of the kids whose letters got published this issue, please let me know. I'd like to hear from you. Heck, if you are one of the parents featured in this issue, particularly the one who's the die-hard RPG player, also let me know. I'd like to know if you're still playing video games and what you're playing. Heck, if you're interested in doing like a Skype interview or whatever, that would be pretty cool too. Anyway, we also have 2 stories of players with hand injuries who compensate by playing the NES with their feet. Like with the article earlier about sip and puff controllers helping people with mobility issues, with hand dexterity issues due to injuries being able to still play video games, I wonder if this is a thing that's still viable with modern controllers. Particularly stuff that uses heavily uses triggers and bumpers. Kind of curious. We then move on to our second featured NES game overall, and our first game of the issue with FZero. We have a rundown of the controls and the 4 selectable vehicles. We also have maps of each of the 3 leagues: Knight, Queen, and King. It bears mentioning that this is the first game write-up I've encountered in Nintendo Power that actually discusses the controls in the write-up. Normally, if I need to know anything about the controls, I have to look up a scan of the manual online, or check an FAQ that has the control information listed. FZero is an excellently put-together racing game, and probably one of the best console racing games of all time. Yes, I'm including modern 16-bit, not 16-bit, modern 32-bit or later generation stuff like current gen. I'm including games like Wipeout in this. This game's controls are incredibly smooth, they work perfectly, the track designs are put together incredibly well, and the game has its own excellent sense of speed considering the hardware and the tech. Each of the track types has its own distinct look and its own distinct shtick, where you know coming into it, okay, this is probably going to be a windy track, or this is going to be a very twisty-turny track, or this one's going to have some environmental obstacles. As soon as you encounter a track of this type, you can have a reasonable guess of what's going to come up with later tracks of that type. Additionally, I suspect, though I have no actual proof on this, that this game kind of spearheaded and built the popularity that allowed later games like Wipeout and other futuristic racing games, Extreme G, that sort of thing, to come into existence. This game showed that, hey, there's a desire for racing games that go above and beyond your vehicle tires on a track. When people want to go fast, they want to go really fast. As it is, I also like the fact that each of the 4 racers handle differently enough that players shouldn't have any problems finding one that fits their play style, while all of them are very well balanced with each other, to the point that with knowledge of the track in your vehicle, you shouldn't have any problems winning with any of the 4. All of them just work control-wise. No racer is inherently superior to the other ones. Well, it's the October issue, so in Nestors Adventures, Nestor is going trick-or-treating. I'll give them credit. This is the first time they've done a strip of Nestors Adventures or Howard and Nestor that is actually meant to link up with a particular holiday in that issue's month. Anyway, our tip for this issue is for Star Wars, and it is that if you get a running start, you can jump across further gaps. I'm pretty sure it's been a thing in video games, in particular NES games, since Super Mario Brothers, so I'm not sure how this tip in particular is unique to Star Wars. Remember when Howard and Nestor strips gave tips that were specific to certain games? Specific to those games? Like getting through a particular gap in Ninja Gaiden by doing a triangle jump downwards, or finding a hidden pizza in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I miss those days. In classified information, we have the stage select code for Vice Project Doom, which I think is a rerun. On a newer front, we have a bunch of user-submitted tips for Super Mario World. Like, 2 pages worth of them. Next up is our cover game, and one in a franchise near and dear to my heart. The NES port of Interplay's Star Trek... Next up is our cover game, one in a franchise near and dear to my heart. The NES port of Interplay's Star Trek 25th Anniversary adventure game. Sadly, this game doesn't have the voice acting that the game's CD-ROM release had. Also, the article gets Lieutenant Uhura's name wrong, instead giving her name as Lieutenant Uhuru. I realized the internet wasn't widely available at the time, and there wasn't anything like Wikipedia. Still, you'd think someone in the office would watch Star Trek and would be able to give a correction on Lieutenant Uhura's name. Either that, or whoever wrote her name down doesn't close their A's, and who does that? Anywho, the guide itself gives some tips on the early episodes of the game. Now, I want to apologize in advance for any video glitches that you may see. This is due to the emulator I'm using to capture gameplay footage. I'm also using a Retron 5 for my home console playing, so because that is effectively a software emulator as well, those glitches may also appear on that system. I can safely say that they had no noticeable effect on the gameplay, only on the graphics. Star Trek is a interesting adventure game. Unlike most of the genre, there are some significant action elements to the game. You're going around planets, occasionally there are critters on the planet that will try to kill you, you have to stun them, that sort of thing. However, there isn't really a death penalty. It's not like, King's Quest or Maniac Mansion, where you can die, it's game over, you have to go back to your last save. If your away team is disabled on the planet's surface, it is beamed up to the Enterprise, at which point you just beam right back down again. Structurally, the game tries to replicate an episode of Star Trek for each little planet you go to. On each planet, there's a problem the Enterprise must resolve before moving on to the next world. Starting with the need to find lithium crystals, to having to go undercover on Sigma Iotia, the planet from A Piece of the Action, to retrieve Dr. McCoy's lost, it's either tricorder or communicator. The game's music even replicates some of Alexander Courage's themes from the show. My main complaint with the game is that you have very little control of the movement of the other members of your away team. If the action elements of the games were removed, this wouldn't really be a problem. As it stands, it can cause some unnecessary setbacks on away missions where a crewman just kind of keeps stumbling in front of the killer plant on whatever world you're on and gets up getting themselves taken out. Thus causing you, if it's a mission-critical character, to have to beam up to the Enterprise to recover the injured crewman and then beam back down again. All in all, if you are a Star Trek fan, this is definitely a game that's worth picking up, or at least that's what I'd like to say. I say that because, as of this recording, the CD-ROM version, with voice acting by all of the original cast of the show, including DeForest Kelley, is available for purchase on GOG for $6 US, and it will run on pretty much every system. So get that version instead. You will thank me later. Next, LJN has another baseball game with Roger Clemens MVP Baseball. The article doesn't appear to show that the game has either the MLB Team or Players Association license, but it does have the endorsement of Roger Clemens, so that's something, I guess. Anyway, this is a baseball game with a very, very different camera perspective than probably any other baseball game I've ever played on any console, including modern ones. Specifically, during fielding, the camera angle is placed lower to the ground and closer to the fielder, to, I suspect, somewhat replicate the view that player would have while fielding, and thus theoretically allow the player to better judge where the ball was going to end up, and in turn, again, in theory, allowing them to field about as well as the computer does. It's a really novel concept, and I like it. The problem is because I'm so utterly used to how every other baseball game handles controls, particularly with fielding, in order to do well at this game, I have to unlearn everything I've learned about playing baseball video games. Still, it's an attempt to balance fielding so the player and the computer are on equal footing, and I have to applaud the developers for that. In fact, this is probably the most ambitious and creatively designed sports game I have ever encountered in terms of how it tries to shake things up, and I am pleased by the fact that this game was coming out of LJN of all publishers. Let it no longer be said that everything that came out of LJN was crap. In Counselor's Corner, we have a bunch of adventure game and RPG tips, in particular with advice for Maniac Mansion, The Uninvited, and Crystallis. We then have a rerun strategy guide this issue, as the magazine is revisiting Metroid with a fairly comprehensive guide. However, as I covered Metroid all the way back in Part 3, I'm going to give this game a miss and put a link to Episode 3 in the show notes.